I picked this next game. Just when you skim the slate that we've got in the SEC coming up, this game really stuck out to me, mostly because I've seen these two teams play a lot this year, and they're kind of up and down, but I'm really interested in how they're progressing throughout the year, and that's Arkansas at Mississippi State. And right now, it's floating around a 1-point pick 'em kind of thing, which a lot of people would think that's crazy because Arkansas beat the crap out of Florida, put a bunch of points on Alabama, has a high-powered offense. But the more I think about it, the more it makes sense, and it really sounds crazy for me to say, with a Mississippi State team that's coming off a 51-3 thrashing against Alabama. But I will say this. Fitzgerald's been playing pretty good lately, and I thought he actually showed some flashes against Alabama with his arm that kind of impressed me. And I think you mentioned that a little bit in the BYU game, where you saw how you could see something sort of emerging there. So let me know, am I crazy to think that Mississippi State could win this game? We'll do our picks in a minute, but am I crazy?
I don't think you're crazy to say they can win it. I mean, Mississippi State, to win this football game, is probably going to have to sustain some offense and run the football. At this point, there are 6 teams in the SEC that average 5 yards per carry or more, right? And 5 of them, probably offhand. You'll guess LSU, you guess Alabama, you'll guess Auburn. Most people realize A&M has been running the ball like gangbusters, and a lot of people know Kentucky's been really good. But the 6th team is Mississippi State. They've been consistently productive on the ground. The passing game, I think has benefited somewhat from that. When they've struggled running the ball and put pressure on Fitzgerald, he's predictably struggled. But he's a good runner. He gives balance. He's been that BYU game. There was a switch that flipped. I mean, he became a gritty player, willing to bang out runs, and I think the team got behind him a little bit after. There were some games like South Carolina where I don't know that they had any faith in him. But the other thing is he can occasionally make some wow throws. Well, if you can move the ball running it with consistency, and you can let him be inconsistent, that lets him be inconsistent. Because I don't we had this discussion in our game of the week, right? If I can get 5.5 yards per play running it, or 5.5 yards per carry, I don't normally end up in a situation where I need a 10-yard pass. If I need a pass, it needs to be something pretty simple in a weird situation. But for the most part, what's going to happen is I can have, carry for 6 yards, end up 2nd and 4, throw an incompletion, get 3rd and 4, and I should be able to run it for 4 yards in a lot of scenarios. I'm in a balance 3rd and 4. They can't stack up the run. They can't stack up against the pass. So I'm, facing a balanced defense. I'm at no disadvantage. I can still run the ball for a 5.5 yard per carry average on that 3rd down, keep the drive alive. And that means on this 2nd down play, that 2nd and 4 I just talked about, I can run whatever pass play I want to run. I don't have to worry about what is the play Nick Fitzgerald can complete with consistency. I can let my receivers go downfield and let him try to make a play because he has some pretty good arm talent. Where Mississippi State gets in trouble is if it's 3rd and 6 or 3rd and 7, I need to pass the ball. And if I don't, I end the drive right then and there. And in those situations, now you start to have to really think, okay, what's the play that we can execute the most consistently? And you start to go, I don't know, because there are a lot of plays that he misses on a lot. And if you have to rely on those 3rd and 7 plays with, 2 or 3 times on a drive, there's probably going to be one that he just misses. So it's a huge difference for his effectiveness. If you're running the ball successfully and I can take some shots and try to generate some chunk 20, 30 yard plays through his arm talent, versus if I'm not running it consistently, then I need him to generate consistency with his arm more than I need yardage from him. And he's a lot better at generating chunk yardage than he is generating consistent yardage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's actually the reason why, I think Miss State can win this game, but it's the reason why I'm picking Arkansas. I think both of these teams have pretty bad defenses, and I don't think that's at this point that's not anything provocative. That they play bad defense. I mean, Arkansas gave up 38 to LSU this weekend. Mississippi State gave up a ton of points to Samford. They play their poor defenses, but the offenses on the other side of the field that they're going to be facing, one is more consistent. Now, I will say that because Miss State can run the ball a little bit, I think there's an opportunity there, but I don't think they can run it or throw it consistently enough to keep up with the amount of points that they're going to give up to Arkansas. And they're not going to be able to keep Arkansas's offense on the bench for the whole game. So for that reason, I'm taking Arkansas. But I don't think this is a game where Mississippi State fans need to go into it and thinking, "Oh, we're going to lose." No, no point in being excited about it. I still think it can be an interesting game. I just it might not be fair. But to me, it seems Fitzgerald's game a lot seems like Trevor Knight's in that he can make an absolutely wow throw. But then he's going to be a 50% passer with a 6.7 yard per attempt, which is not enough in terms of yards per play that they need to bolster the running game and put up points.
It's an interesting prediction. Um, I'm actually going to disagree. There's one stat here that defines this game. It's the same thing, really, and from talking to me and from our discussions in the past, right, on the show and elsewhere, I did not think Arkansas had a prayer beating LSU, and the reason was Arkansas is out of 128 teams in the country, 128th in yards per carry allowed. They are the single worst rush defense in the country statistically. Now, a lot of that's inflated because they have to play LSU and Auburn and Alabama. I understand that, but it is still statistically the worst rush defense in the country, period. And so you think, well, that's really bad for Arkansas. Well, the flip side is, what does Arkansas do well? We've talked all year that there's a misconception, Bielema football, power football. This is a pass first Arkansas team. Very explosive, very, very good quarterback. We were both kind of shocked early in the season at how good Austin Allen was. And Austin Allen is the total reason they beat Florida. It's the reason they, made a game somewhat, with Alabama, even in it's the reason they beat Ole Miss. But the inability to run the ball is why when they're cold or Allen got beat up like in that Auburn game that they've suffered. And I know Arkansas fans have actually listened to our show a fair amount. I hope they realize that I haven't been bashing them unnecessarily or anything like that. I've just been pointing out that they're not a very good run team. They're a very good pass team, and it's going to make them really uneven. But Mississippi State, to end that, is actually 87th in the country in pass defense. They're far and away the worst pass defense in the SEC. So you have a Mississippi State team that really relies on the run because they have an inconsistent quarterback and has a pretty good run game against the worst rush defense. And you have one of the best passing offenses in Arkansas playing against the worst pass defense in the SEC. It's an interesting matchup in that sense. But my thing with that is anytime you tell me that one team is going to be able to run the ball very successfully, maybe not at will, but consistently and consistently, and the other team should be able to pass the ball really well, I am almost always going to take the team that runs the ball. Because if I can get 6 yards per carry, it doesn't really matter a whole heck of a lot what happens because I will be able to grind out drives. I'm going to be able to exhaust the other defense, and that creates constant pressure on the other offense to score. And we've seen this a couple times with Arkansas and with other teams in the conference. We talked about it a lot with Ole Miss versus Auburn. That we said that we thought Auburn would beat Ole Miss because Auburn was going to be able to continually sustain drives. We thought I felt like Ole Miss was going to have a lot of success throwing the football. I wasn't really sold on Auburn's pass defense, still not completely. But the trick in that game was Ole Miss having to throw to win the game was just too much pressure. And all it took was one Evan Ingram drop to lose. I think the same thing applies here. I think you're going to have a very high scoring game because both these teams are good on offense where the other team's bad on defense. I think Arkansas is going to put up a lot of yards and points, but I think it's asking too much for a quarterback to be able to be that consistent to sustain each and every drive compared to another offense that's just got to run the ball play after play every drive. For that reason, and I will note, even in that blowout loss to Alabama, I was seriously impressed by how much push Mississippi State was getting on the offensive line. They were, they're held to a low per carry average, large part because Alabama tackles very well at the second level, but they were making some holes for the running backs, and they were actually pushing the Alabama defenders back on a lot of run plays. So I think this ends up being a very high scoring game. I think it ends up a lot like last year's game, which was I think 51-50. Mississippi State won. I think we see a repeat of that, and in that much of a shootout, if one team is running the ball and one team is throwing it, give me the team that runs, and that's why I picked Mississippi State. And I think it's going to be a barn burner. I think it'll be something like 49-45, something crazy.
All of that you just said makes sense if you use logic. But honestly, I think it's kind of like you took Alabama out of LSU for the model. I think you can take Alabama out of Miss State. I know 51-3, but they beat USC 52-6. Like, it's just a rare matchup animal for anybody. I think Miss State's kind of trended in a positive direction. Especially given, they beat Texas A&M and A&M had some injuries, but that was a big win for them, obviously. I just think that Arkansas is just good enough as a defensive unit as a whole, kind of like we saw against Florida, where Florida doesn't do anything exceptionally well, and Arkansas found a way to neutralize them enough as a unit as a whole, even though they're really bad, run defensive unit and not a great pass defensive unit. They did enough to slow down the offense, to let their offense do what they do, at least in some capacity. And Alabama fans, if they're listening to this, aren't going to love hearing this, but I think what Jalen Hurts was able to do against Mississippi State's defense from a passing standpoint should scare Mississippi State when they're about to see what they're about to see, because Jalen Hurts didn't get infinitely better in one game. It didn't happen. He's still got some issues. Miss State is just that bad with their pass defense. So with that, all that being said, I'm going to go without a lot of logic and just kind of on my gut. And I'm going to say Arkansas 37, Mississippi State 31. And give me your score again.
I said, 49-45?
Okay, yours sounds like a lot more fun game to watch than mine. So,
well, it depends on what you mean by fun. That's the sort of game that's going to cause a lot of 65-year-old fans in those fan bases some ulcers.
Well, it's funny because I love them on either end of the spectrum. Like, I love the 10-0 Alabama game and the 9-6 Alabama LSU game, a couple years ago. I love those. But then if we're gonna do it on offense, let's just do it. Let's have 55-50 kind of game, and just because again, if you don't have one of your teams in that game, it's a lot of fun to watch.